Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another video. As you can tell from the title and thumbnail of the video, today I want to talk about two big moves that two contending teams just made in the buyout market. Now, neither of these teams were super active in the trade deadline, which just came and went this past week, but both of them waited patiently for these buyouts to happen and made some big pickups that really will help them in the race for a title heading into this final stretch of the season. Both of these pickups, I think, do help the teams, and I'm going to explain why I think that each of them helps their respective teams. The moves, of course, that I'm talking about are Andre Drummond to the Los Angeles Lakers today after he got bought out from the Cleveland Cavaliers, and yesterday Lamarcus Aldridge joining the Brooklyn Nets after being rumored that he was going to join the Miami Heat for a while now. Aldridge decided to join the Brooklyn Nets and help fortify them for a run to try and win that Eastern Conference for the first time in who knows how long. It's going to be interesting. I don't blame these players for joining these squads. They want rings. That's what they're in the NBA to do, especially a Lamarcus Aldridge who's super old, at least in NBA terms. He's not really that old in people terms, but being 36 is old in NBA terms, and he wants to try and get a ring before he retires, and this is his best opportunity. While Andre Drummond wants to show that he's a winning player, he's really only ever thrived or been on bad squads, and so he kind of wants to find an opportunity to show that he can help win and maybe secure another contract or a decent contract going into next season. So I get why they made these moves. I'm not super mad about it. Other people are really mad about it, and I guess that's maybe because my team isn't very good. The Thunder aren't trying to win right now, and so maybe as a fan of a rebuilding team, I don't see them as much of a threat at the moment. Maybe if we get into contention in the next couple seasons and these teams are still super stacked, then maybe I'll be more upset about it, but for right now, I'm not super pressed. I get why they join these teams. I know that the Thunder are a small market team and that buyouts are always going to favor the larger markets. It's just the way things work. I don't really think there's a great workaround to that. You can't stop players from signing a contract with a team that limits player freedom. It limits a lot of stuff in the NBA. Players Association would never ever go for that. So I don't know what you really do with the buyout market. I don't think this is a massive deal, but we'll see how it ends up affecting things. So I'm going to talk about the moves now, talk about how I think it affects each of the teams, and I want to start with Andre Drummond to the Los Angeles Lakers. This one is probably more polarizing because Aldridge, everyone's like, oh, this helps the Nets. Some people are rating the help that he's going to give to the Nets based on his age. He is older, even if he is a still effective player, and so they're saying it's not going to help them out that much. I'll talk about that all in a second. But there's some people saying that Drummond makes the Lakers worse, which just isn't true. I'll kind of explain why. The first thing is that he gives them some versatility with their big men. They brought in Marc Gasol and Montrezl Harrell this past offseason to try and be like that versatility that they needed in the front court. You have Marc Gasol to play defense, be that championship DNA type stuff. He can pass, he can pop out and hit a three if you need him to. While Montrezl Harrell is explosive, he comes off the bench, he scores for you, and he gets you buckets when you need him to get you buckets. If they need scoring, they could go to Harrell. If they need defense, they could go to Marc Gasol. The problem is Marc Gasol has not been as good as they needed him to be. He's not quite the player he was last season, and his age is really starting to show this season to the point where he struggles a lot of the time just being on the court and doing whatever. He can still knock down threes if you need him to. He still has those moments where he's effective, but he's not as effective as they were hoping for. So bringing in a guy like Andre Drummond brings that versatility back that they wanted previously. Montrezl Harrell is still that great dynamic scorer that you can bring in, and he's a spark plug off the bench. Andre Drummond, you can start him. He's going to grab you rebounds. He can run to the rim. And Marc Gasol, if you need him to, can come in and hit a three. And he's got that championship DNA that we talked about. He's been there. He's done that before. And last offseason last playoff run that they had proved how important sometimes that DNA is when you have a guy like Rondo who really steps up in playoff time. Obviously, we'll see how that continues this season as he continues to get older. But at least in the bubble, he stepped up a lot. And so Andre Drummond once again brings in some versatility, and now if you need a score, you can bring in Harrell. If you need to hit a three, or if you just need to space the floor, have more of a threat out there, you can bring Marc Gasol. And if you need to grab a board, then you have Andre Drummond. You have versatility. That's what you need your players to do. And Drummond is a bigger body who can help. He's not a great defender or necessarily a solid defender. He's kind of average at best at times. But if Andre Drummond is able to lock in on that end, he can be effective because he does have the frame to bully some people out of the paint and kind of deter shots in a way. So he does bring some versatility to this team. And Drummond is a player that's polarizing because he kind of just does his own thing. But if there's any player in the entire NBA, maybe even the history of the NBA, that could get Andre Drummond to buy in, it's LeBron James. If you remember, in the finals in 2014-15, LeBron James turned Timofey Mozgov into a $64 million center. The Lakers gave him a $64 million contract. And it's Timofey Mozgov. He's not very good, but the way that LeBron plays, it got Mozgov that contract. And so all Drummond has to do is to be a net positive with LeBron James and especially Anthony Davis on the court is grab rebounds, catch lobs, get put back dunks. That's all he has to do, and he's going to be a net positive. You have Anthony Davis there, who's a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, which helps Drummond because Drummond doesn't have to be the focal point of the defense. A lot of times when Drummond was on teams, he would be the focal point of the defense. We could think back to this year's Cleveland Cavaliers team where Drummond is supposed to be the anchor down low. Now he doesn't really have to be that. Anthony Davis is a much better rim protector. He's a much better defender overall. And so he can play the defense. He can help to deter shooters. He can alter shots while Drummond can just go up and grab that board to secure the end of the possession so they can move on to the offensive end of the ball. Drummond has the potential to be a positive on this team. He's not a great player. He's not like an all-star level player. But this is a chance for him to at least establish himself as a winning player. This is a chance for him to show that he can be part of a winning roster. And I think once LeBron and AD get back, he's going to be really effective in that role that I just talked about there. I think he's going to buy in. Maybe this is just me being optimistic, but I think he's really going to buy in. Now, I'm going to move on to Aldridge to the Brooklyn Nets. This gives them a lot more depth. The Nets, the reason that people were concerned about them trading for Harden is that they were super thin. It was their 3 stars and then very few other players. Obviously, you have Spencer Dinwiddie, who's out with injury. Maybe he could come back this season as well, but it's seeming kind of iffy on that. DeAndre Jordan just isn't the player he once was, and so he doesn't bring much depth either. But over the course of the season, they've made some solid moves to add more depth. They picked up Bruce Brown in the offseason, which I think was a really underrated pickup then, and especially now, people are realizing how good Bruce Brown has the potential to be. Still not sure why the Pistons traded him. I liked Bruce Brown a lot on that team, but, it's whatever. Now they're bringing in, a Blake Griffin, which is another guy they brought in through buyout from Detroit. You've got Lamarcus Aldridge now who can help score. He can space the floor. DeAndre Jordan, he's kind of more of a depth guy than a star guy at this point in his career. Nick Claxton is really starting to emerge, a guy that a lot of people weren't sure how effective he was going to be, but he has exceeded even the biggest of Nick Claxton fans' expectations in very limited time to open up his season after missing the beginning with a lot of injuries. And then, of course, you have Kevin Durant also there in the front court alongside of Joe Harris. If we want to talk about him at the small forward, they have a ton of options there. And Lamarcus Aldridge is reportedly going to play significant minutes. So it's not like this is just a depth pickup, even though it does add that depth. This is a potential starting center type pickup. And he adds yet another scoring threat to a Nets team that just doesn't need scoring. They really don't even need it. But why not have more? What's the harm, There weren't any super great defensive players on the market in terms of buyouts, at least. Maybe trade deadline, you could talk about that a little bit more. But in terms of the buyout market, there weren't any great defenders. So why not just add more scoring? Why not just add Lamarcus Aldridge, who is going to be a floor stretcher at the center spot and open the floor more for Kyrie, Durant, and Harden to attack the rim? At the same time, though, Aldridge has a good post-up game. If they decide they want to slow the pace and give it to Aldridge down low, they don't really have a great post player on this team right now. DeAndre Jordan's not going to do that for you. Nick Claxton is super young. Blake Griffin isn't a ton of a post player. He's more of a pop out and shoot the 3 type player at this point in his career, maybe hit some mid-ranges. He can kind of roll to the rim a little bit. We've seen him kind of develop that more after leaving Detroit, where he had never dunked, or he hadn't dunked this season. He hadn't dunked since 2019, and now he's catching lobs back there in Brooklyn. So I don't know what that's about, but he gives them a threat in the post that if they want to slow it down, he can pop out to the 3-point line and stretch the floor if they want to go for a more guard-centric, attacking the rim type approach. He brings so much versatility. Similarly to the way that Drummond brings that versatility, Aldridge gives them another option. If you're looking for defense, you could put Nick Claxton out there, who's super lengthy. He's shown a lot of opportunity he's been given a lot of opportunities to defend different types of players. He's been asked to switch a lot on everything. So he's defended guards, he's defended forwards, he defends centers, and he does it all pretty well. He's a very versatile defensive player, and he has a lot of potential on that end. And if he can harness that, he becomes a great defensive weapon for this Nets team to have, especially on a team that a lot of people, their biggest concern about them is defense. Then you can just let Lamarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin focus on being scorers. They can stretch the floor. They can just get you buckets if you need to. If KD, Kyrie, and James Harden, all 3 of them are somehow struggling to get you buckets, these guys can come in and get you some buckets, and DeAndre Jordan can kind of just catch some lobs every now and again. Be a rebounder. So that's Lamarcus Aldridge to the Nets. Now, I hope those points make sense to you guys, because I know a lot of people weren't super high on these moves, particularly, of course, the Andre Drummond one. But I do think both of these players help these two teams that I thought were already their conference favorites get better. But also, these teams have more potential to add more players. Avery Bradley, Jeff Teague, Otto Porter, those are just examples of some guys who may be available to these teams on the buyout market before the end of the season. Now, with all of the things I just said, and with the potential to add more, does this mean that the finals are pretty much decided? Does this mean that we shouldn't just watch the rest of the season because it's going to be a Lakers-Nets finals? Are they the favorites? Yeah, I think they have to be. I think if you're saying they're not the favorites, you're kind of missing something. But it's not set in stone or anything. Injuries are affecting both teams. LeBron and AD are missing some time. Kevin Durant's missing a lot of time. Kyrie's been here and there. I think he's supposed to come back against the Timberwolves in the upcoming days, so that'd be cool to see him back on the court. But both teams are being affected by injuries, and they're also trying to rest some guys. And so if they fall in the standings at any point, now I know the Brooklyn Nets have been keeping pace with the Sixers to try and get that 1 seed in the East, but the Bucks are hot. The Sixers also have continued to keep pace. The Lakers are really starting to fall. And so when you have these two teams that have been injury affected, there is potential to fall a little bit in the standings, which makes your path to the finals a little bit harder. There's less room to fall in the East because it's really those top 3 teams and then everyone else. While in the West, the Lakers could potentially fall to like a 5, a 6 before LeBron and or AD get back. So there is potential for them to fall in the standings, making their road to the finals a little bit harder. Additionally, there's a ton of good squads in the NBA right now. This is a year where there are a lot of teams I could see making the finals. In the West, you have the Jazz, who have been dominant this season. Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, everyone playing super well. Quinn Snyder is a fantastic coach, potentially the coach of the year this season. The Suns picked up Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Talk a lot about DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Ayton has really bought into his role, and he's been solid this season. Devin Booker is playing like a potential MVP candidate if the Suns are able to snag that 1 seed. You've got the Clippers, who are obviously a threat. They have Kawhi Leonard, they have Paul George, Serge Ibaka, Marcus Morris, added Rajon Rondo. I'm not a huge fan of that move, just in terms of giving up Lou Williams, but he does bring some championship DNA to a team that desperately needed it, as well as the Denver Nuggets, who just added Aaron Gordon and got better, and were in the Western Conference Finals just last season. In the East, you've got the Sixers with MVP candidate, and before he got injured, MVP frontrunner Joel Embiid. Ben Simmons is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Tobias Harris has played like an all-star because him and Doc Rivers are reunited, and Doc Rivers does bring a lot of much-needed coaching experience to this team, with Brett Brown having underachieved the past few seasons. This Sixers team is really, really good, and they are, in my opinion, the biggest threat to the Brooklyn Nets to come out of the East, mainly because of the guy I talked about to start their kind of rundown, Joel Embiid. He's going to torture whoever you put on Joel Embiid. He's going to absolutely fry and torture them at any given opportunity, and I think he does make life very difficult for them. If he could put some of those bigs in foul trouble, given they have a lot of very effective bigs still, that could make things a little difficult for them. Same thing with the Bucks, who have Giannis Antetokounmpo, MVP candidate, 2-time MVP, obviously Defensive Player of the Year. He brings so much versatility to that team, and they are a well-experienced team. Even if they've never made the finals, they've been through these playoff runs a lot of times, and ultimately, Giannis is going to do the same thing, where he can just absolutely attack you at the rim, and the Nets don't necessarily have someone to stop him, so they become a threat. And you could talk about last year's Eastern Conference champions, the Miami Heat. I think a little less so than the Sixers and Bucks, but they did add Victor Oladipo in the trade deadline. They added Nemanja Bjelica, who is a threat to hit from outside. And if that team can kind of find that magic that they had going into the playoffs last season in the bubble, maybe something can happen. So there are still really good squads. I know these two teams are favorites, but there's good squads. Additionally, COVID just makes things weird. Players have missed more time than they've previously missed in the past because of not only injuries, but COVID protocols. There's potential for COVID protocols to affect the playoffs. I'm really crossing my fingers that it doesn't, because that would really ruin some things, but there is potential for that. COVID just kind of makes things weird. We're seeing that in the March Madness tournament right now. Even without players catching COVID, things are just kind of weird. And I think that also comes down to the lack of fans, which takes away home court advantage. Some teams benefit from that. Some teams may fall short because of that. And that could also cause a little bit of chaos in the playoffs this season. So I don't think it's set in stone. But if I had to pick the finals today, I have to go with Nets Lakers. Both of these teams are stacked, and I would be kind of surprised if they bowed out early. Not necessarily like I'd be surprised if they didn't make the finals, but I would be surprised if they, I guess I would be kind of shocked if these teams didn't make the finals, at least looking at things right now. There are some really good squads. Maybe shocked is the wrong word. right, they're my favorites. Really, all I need to say is that those two teams are my favorites. But it's not necessarily a bad thing if these two teams face off. There's a ton of interesting storylines we could talk about. A LeBron versus KD again. LeBron trying to get his revenge on Kevin Durant with those Golden State Warriors teams. You have LeBron and Kyrie playing in the finals. Longtime teammates, of course, won that ring together in 2016. You've got Blake Griffin versus Andre Drummond, two longtime teammates. And you have a lot of players that have been huge names in the NBA for years trying to get their first rings. Harden, Lamarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, guys like that. So there are a lot of interesting storylines. I think a Nets-Lakers finals would be super enjoyable. I don't know if I want to pick a winner right now because I don't want to get set to that. I'll talk more about the playoffs as we get closer to them, but I just want to make this video talking about those moves, what I thought about them, because they do really affect the title picture in my mind. I know these players aren't the players that they used to be, but, you know, they're still solid players, and they still do give their teams options. They help them make more informed decisions when trying to figure out situations. I think it's really going to be a chess match between these two teams if they meet up in the finals with so many different players that fit so many different roles. It's going to be cool to see how they decide to go at each other. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment below telling me what you thought about these moves, and I will see you guys later. Real one, say it back.